I believe in the Constitution. I believe that one case, the right case, can change the world. If you believe this too, Freedom Council is for you. Pursuing a major case can be overwhelming, but we provide a community of practice so that you have the resources available to support your case. My name is Warner Mendenhall, and we are Freedom Council. Join Freedom Council today. freedomcouncil.org.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage.
And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
With Broken Truth. Hey, where am I? There we are. With Broken Truth, I'm John Davidson, and today we have, of course, the lovely and talented Jennifer Kennedy, the equally and non-gender differentiated lovely and talented Warner Mendenhall, and Brad. And Brad Geyer, who is actually the loveliest and talented. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome. Good morning, everybody.
Yes.
We have a really interesting topic today, John. Let's roll.
I know. Apparently, so I'm doing a news fast this month. I'm off Twitter. I'm off all news websites. So I'm learning how the normies learn. And that means going to the gym and looking at the headlines with the banner at the bottom. And that's all I see is the title. So apparently Venezuela's had some action, but also the Somalian fraud, which, by the way, isn't really covered on the CNN channel for some reason. That's really been a big thing. What do you guys know about this whole Somali fraud in Minnesota?
Well, that is what an opening. Who's going to start?
I can start a little bit. I mean, this type of fraud is blatant, rampant. It's all through the system. I think that the fact that a fraud like this has caught the public imagination is very important. I think we need to realize that this kind of fraud is a nickel and dime fraud compared to the frauds that are occurring with our pharmaceutical industry, with military contracting. We saw the fraud with USAID, which was extensive and was very destructive to our nation and the nation's goals. So I think it's great that the public's getting an education, because I fundamentally believe if we knocked out 80% of the fraud in the system, even 50%, we'd balance our federal budget. There is so much out there that's going on. And I would say that in the Medicare and Medicaid space, it's probably one of the biggest areas of fraud. We're looking at hundreds of billions a year just in that space alone. So I'm thrilled to be seeing this public attention. What I'm not thrilled by, and that I think we need to educate the public about, is that these cases are not simple. They do involve a sophisticated level of legal knowledge, and we'd like to make sure that people know what that is and know where they can get resources and attorneys, which you have to have an attorney to bring these fraud cases, and get these attorneys that will help them bring their cases.
So one of the things I wanted to call this was originally like the origins of fraud, and where that came from was the first time I ever really got to hang out with Brad Geyer was in Houston last year. And Brad, you kind of gave me this. We had to take Ubers because we were at an offsite hotel. So I was like, awesome, I'm going to lock this guy into my crazy for like a whole 40-minute ride every day. It was so wonderful. So you told me this incredible story about when you were at the DOJ, and it explained a lot of why we don't get the white-collar prosecutions like we used to. Brad, can you kind of fill us in on that?
I'll try to put it into as much of a nutshell as I can. So in the mid-'90s, there was a big base closure project, and this was under Clinton 2, I believe, although it probably began even under Clinton 1. And there was an effort to offload a lot of these bases. And I'm sure that like what's best for the country was factored in, but a lot of it came down to who the suite of Congress people who were the most influential. They started these base closures, and also to save money, they started to reduce general births in certain the least politically connected areas of DoD. And as you can imagine, procurement is really not that sexy. So, like in 1994, when I was meeting with the head of the Army Air Force Exchange System, which is basically the PX system globally, I was meeting with a two-star general. His chief of staff was a one-star general. Flash forward to 2009 when I'm in Iraq, and this is roughly March of 2009, and he's briefing me on trying to hit the target that had already been established for withdrawal. There are 110 FOBs, forward operating bases in Iraq, and they were going to get it down to about 20 within, I think it was less than a calendar year. And I said, "Is that really possible?" And he said, "We're going to do it regardless of whether it's possible." Those targets, by the way, had been set prior to the 2008 election. But that person who was responsible for all the material, all the subsistence for the military in Iraq and Afghanistan was a colonel. So, you know, think about all the people in the military in the mid 90s, prognosticating as to what good components of DoD you want to get into to become a general, and they literally removed all the general slots for procurement. Uh, Obviously, after we went into Iraq in 2003, there was a view that the federal government was too slow in terms of how it fulfilled its contracts. So we went to this contractor, heavily relying on contractor status. We're going to be fleet of foot. Everything was going to be more efficient. And in the beginning of uh, the Iraq War, uh, things were just rampant with fraud. By 2005, 2006, uh, the White House, it was then the Bush White House, realized there was a major problem with fraud. I mean, we had accounts of people bringing back suitcases full of cash. I mean, it was unbelievable. So I worked with something known as the National Procurement Fraud Task Force, and we pretty much turned that around. We had full participation by FBI, the 72 inspectors general, all components of Main Justice. And by 2009 or 10, I believe, we'd filed 800 cases. When he started in 2006, there were only two international war zone cases that had been filed. By 2010, they were up at about 110 or 120. Each investigation probably equates to about 10 grand jury investigations. So in 2009, there's another change in administration. And basically, procurement fraud and grant fraud was shut off. Those spigots were shut off. Um, uh, I mean, I could say degraded, but really they were pretty much shut off. The antitrust division, which had done a lot of the capacity building uh, with its very richly staffed paralegal force, was moved from procurement fraud, grant fraud, and started to chase housing fraud, if you can believe it, housing auction fraud. And the IGs started to go to a model where they convinced themselves, they all read from the same headlines and drank the same Kool-Aid, that they had prevented all the fraud. By 2012, Vice President, they created a new task force known as the Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force. The head of that was Vice President Biden. His second was Attorney General Holder. They had essentially like a victory conference in Philadelphia, where they had announced that they had eliminated procurement fraud and grant fraud in this galaxy. And Biden
Eliminated it
actually
completely.
Biden actually announced that they had prevented fraud in the one, because remember, we had the financial crisis hit around September of 2008. That's the lead up to the election. And they were talking about 600 billion in TARP funds and 1.2 trillion in uh, mostly grant funds that were just going to hit the street. And Democrats and Republicans both fed at the trough. And I think my interpretation was that there was too much political risk at having career civil servants have a long leash on who they could investigate and prosecute, and everybody's leashes were pulled in, from the IGs to the FBI to the Department of Justice. So by 2012, Vice President Biden had essentially a victory meeting where he declared that there was only 0.1% of the $1 trillion had been attributable to fraud. They basically prevented it all.
What a relief.
Everything was on a platform. It was actually a great platform that was supported by Dow Jones, multi-million dollar contract, tens of millions of dollars of contract. You'd go in, punch in information, and pull up stuff on grants. That was all taken offline in 2014. Everything got erased.
Well, I mean, we can see within the COVID crisis, for example. I mean, I'll give you a prediction. I think the fraud levels are approaching a third within the COVID monies that were released. And I think at the time, and I was very aware of that in 08, 09, and the monies that were sent out then, there was an incredible amount of fraud that was happening at that point. And that funds were issued to hedge funds. Right out of the Treasury into hedge funds. And I'm reading about what they're doing with that money. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And on top of that, Holder refused to, prosecute the banks and the bankers that were involved in the mortgage fraud that was happening at that time. So it was incredible that no one was held accountable for that. All the ratings agencies, all the banks, all the loans that were out there. I mean, there should have been prosecutions right and left on that never happened. A few did, and there were a few False Claims Act cases that did very well. Hundreds of millions of dollars were recovered, billions were recovered, but it was in the hundreds of billions is the problem. It wasn't even a drop in the bucket, basically.
Speaking of a drop in the bucket, so something you said early on, Warner, you were saying that the current Somali fraud is a nickel and diming.
It's nickel. Yeah.
Right. Because I think the American public, when you look at those numbers, so Nick Shirley is talking about, here's another 150 million, here's another 175 million. When we hear those numbers in the mainstream, we're not thinking nickels and dimes. But you're saying that this really that's just penny ante stuff that's going on?
Yeah, I think the fraud, let's take a number. I'll give you a number. I think in the federal budget right now, there's $1 trillion worth of yearly fraud. 1 trillion. And that adds up over time. So this has been going on now. And it was even higher when the PPP loans and the EIDL loans were issued. Those years it was even higher than that. But let's just say roughly $1 trillion in fraud. Think. Medicare and Medicaid, we're in the hundreds of billions alone. Military, again, the waste and fraud and abuse in the military, we're in the hundreds of billions. So then we go into social services like this and other services. You can see how I'm coming to that number of $1 trillion. And the attorneys that do this work right now, we have been, I've been working in this field for 30 years. I've been yelling and screaming about it, and I can't get attention paid. The biggest case we had was a gas and oil ripoff because the federal government owns gas and oil resources that it then leases or it has rights to them, and those are getting ripped off as well. We found an incident in Ohio with $2 billion basically being stolen from the taxpayer. And we actually, there's an opinion, it's called the Muskingum Conservancy case. And, oh my God, one of the courts, we had to go on appeal. One of the judges there did agree with us, but two did not agree with us. We tried to get the Supreme Court, could not, but there was $2 billion there. that should have been recovered for the taxpayer. And we could not get the federal government to do it. And in fact, the agency in charge of that was the Army Corps of Engineers. And that agency, the U.S. Attorney told me that agency nixed our case. And that frequently happens. The U.S. attorneys consider the agencies to be the client, and they do what the agency demands. And if the agency says they don't want to pursue it, they won't pursue it. I mean, that's one of the things that frustrates me right now about the Pfizer case, the Brooke Jackson Pfizer case, is Bobby Kennedy is the agency right now, HHS, and they are maintaining a position that was established initially, under the Bush administration, and they're carrying on the Bush administration policies right now in court at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, come on, I expect a change, and I know Bobby's doing everything that he can, and has there's a lot of issues there, but I expect this drug to be pulled off the market, meaning the COVID vaccine. It's so dangerous, and it was based on a fraud that we have clearly shown, demonstrated, seen with all the public records that have been requested. I think most people understand that the clinical trials were fraudulent and the medicine doesn't work, and in fact causes a lot of harm.
And yet, how many people are out there fighting these claims? This is, we've got all this multi-billions of dollars of fraud hanging out there. So Brad, Warner, why are there not just leagues of attorneys jumping on these?
Well, Brad, go ahead and answer that, then I'll have an answer.
Well, again, I think the country's in a strange place where a lot of its most robust industries have been reduced to essentially oligopolies that are there's a racketeering function to it, and you also have a change to how procurement fraud, grants fraud, and science fraud was investigated and prosecuted. It was, like I said, it was basically sunsetted over 15 years ago, where we went to this quote unquote prevention model. And you get to take credit for having prevented fraud by not investigating or prosecuting it. That's like, it became a metric. It used to be that you used to have to file cases to get a stat. And then, they started to count how many cases they estimated weren't filed. And that was a metric on success. And whenever you see a pocket of money, like for instance, recoveries that used to go into the criminal fines fund, I guess it was under Obama 1, they started to figure out ways how to reallocate that money, so it wouldn't hit the general crimes fines go into the general treasury. That's money that really you can't do much with. But if you recalculate it so it goes to restitution, then that gets funneled through a couple of agencies within the Department of Justice. And that goes to what used to go to like rape victims, now goes to NGOs that can provide the same kind of service to victims. So it's like across the board, you have just a level of corruption that's just seeped into everything. And these block grants, what they did with the Iraq War, where the Department of Defense relied more on military contractors to be more efficient. They did the same thing with block grants, where these states are getting, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars. Whoever has the most illegal immigrants, or the most, homeless, whoever has the biggest population gets, that's reflected in their participation level and how much money they receive. So it's like everything's just why does it take so long? You have to essentially rescope everything, get back to basics and restructure things. And it's just going to take a long time.
And if you have an administration that is continuing the policies of the two prior administrations, that just sounds like that's an incredible backlog. How do you overcome that?
Particularly where, the current president I forget how many U.S. attorneys he's had put in place, but most of them I think have not been put in place yet. He's being resisted at every turn, and so that makes it difficult to implement your policies. And it's like I've always thought that really the greatest hope is that career civil servants inside of the government, rather than viewing it through a political lens, view it through an America restoration lens and do what they can uh, from wherever they're sitting and try to help restore these things as best they can, sort of behind the scenes.
Brad, did you ever investigate Sallyport Global? Are you familiar with that company and their
I
Ballard Air Force
remember,
Base fraud?
yeah, I remember we were tracking something that was happening related to that company, but I don't recall what it was.
Yeah, I
At the
did. Yeah, they essentially Sallyport was connected to General Mark Kelly, who made headlines recently for encouraging soldiers to disobey orders from the president.
right,
But also, Sallyport ran Ballard Air Force Base, and they used contractors. So they were pulling in like South African mercenaries.
John, do you know my involvement with that?
No, I don't.
Oh my God.
Michael Baker International, all that.
Oh my God. We filed a federal false claims act case.
That was you,
Ballard Air Force Base. That's me.
baby.
Oh no, I
Come
mean I
here.
can tell you the background of that. Now,
Let's hear him, Horner.
well, I mean, Eric Prince is involved with Sallyport as well, and he's heavily on the conservative side. I mean, I think that fraud is a nonpartisan issue, regardless of your ideology. But no, I can tell you everything about that. They had a RAPCON system that simply didn't work, and they got paid billions of dollars to run that system in the middle of the desert. And we got F-16s landing without proper approach control. RAPCON means radar approach control. And I had the top, I mean, I literally had the top whistleblowers on that you could possibly have. The guy who ran our air traffic control training center in Colorado, he's the one who brought the case to me.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, he knew all about the air traffic control systems and the RAPCON system. So, no, and I could not get, I met with the Air Force down here in Ohio at Wright-Patterson. We could not get, we had a huge room full of people, gave our presentation, and it went nowhere. I mean, it's a $1 billion fraud, right? There's another $1 billion fraud. I'm the biggest loser in the country, you guys. $1 billion frauds that I've tried to bring forward. And I'm happy to share the complaint so people can see it. It's online. It's available, but that case is long gone, done, packed away, and went nowhere. Even though it caused security problems. It could have put our fighter jets and our fighter pilots at risk, and it costs us $1 million or more per fighter pilot just to get them trained up. So I mean, this is a patriotic mission that we're on here in fighting fraud. It is about, like Brad said, it is about saving this country, but it's also about keeping our warfighters safe. Our soldiers, our sailors, our Air Force members, they're not safe if the radar approach control system is malfunctioning or not functioning. We also looked at Raytheon in Afghanistan. We had all kinds of there was all kinds of issues going on. I had people calling me from Afghanistan. They're like, we're over here and we're not doing anything. We hired on as contractors. It's great, but we're playing video games all day. So we've looked at a lot of issues, but could not get the attention of the federal government. Brad, could you weigh in on that issue?
Yeah, again, a lot of that capacity was just degraded over a 10-year period. And we used to have these massive cases that would be brought, and the government was willing to staff them up, and there was good integration between the inspectors general. A lot of times we'd have auditors, we'd pull auditors in. Each IG has 3 different components: audit, inspections, and investigations. Investigations are like FBI agents. And I think it's probably, if you include certainly if you include the FBI and IRS CID, you have tens of thousands, probably in excess of 100,000, I would bet. 1811 agents, they carry a gun, particularly in as it relates to the inspectors general. They're all trained for investigating fraud cases.
Mhm.
These capabilities were taken offline. I mean, I can't, you have audit, and they have a lot of internal protocols as to what gets audited. But really, all they really want to make sure is that the math was done correctly in terms of how the payments were made. And they discouraged auditors from bringing red flags to the attention of the investigation staff. We used to get lots of leads based on this. It wasn't just whistleblower counsel that were bringing cases to us. We'd have auditors bringing it, and we weren't. There was always internal turf jealousies and things. We'd use those to our advantage. We would say, look, investigation side of the house, you're going to have to work better with your auditors. Let's detail some of them this investigation.
Mhm.
That stuff was all offline.
Brad,
And
what has to happen to get it back online? What
the
needs
president has to get his U.S. attorneys in place,
Mhm.
and you have to get some folks inside of DOJ rebuilding another task force that works cross component, that integrates a lot of these stovepiped institutions that cap out at an IG or at a head of investigations that isn't solely devoted to bringing criminal cases. Nothing works for deterrence like criminal prosecutions
Mhm.
and disgorgement and forfeiture, right? Like, so far, it's a business decision these companies are making. In fact, the incentives are so perverse
Mhm.
that they incentivize all the wrong conduct, both inside the government and out. And so it's a systems problem now, and we're over a decade into it. So uh, it's just going to be a lot of, this is like you're going to have to be, I hate to say it, but a multi-decade effort.
Yeah.
Right now, we're at the point of the show where we're trying to help create a will that this is something that should be done.
And so do you think, okay, had this infrastructure not been degraded, basically eviscerated, do you think this Somali fraud would have been caught long
The
ago?
Somali fraud wouldn't have happened. A lot of
Yeah.
these excesses with these drug approvals, with all the
Mhm.
scientific fraud. In 2007, I believe, we had our first, what was then going to be an annual conference, procurement fraud, grant fraud, science fraud, that was taught at the National Advocacy Center in South Carolina. It was a 4-day program, and we brought every single person, like the experts in the Department of Justice, the
Mhm.
expert agents, the expert auditors, how to do investigations, how to find investigations, how to prosecute them. This quirky issue came up. How do we deal with it? And again, there was a change in administration, and everything changed overnight. They flipped a switch, and to varying degrees, the entire political apparatus benefited. You also had, I think that was the first time where they engineered husband and wife, or say partners, civil, domestic, whatever you want to call,
Mhm.
spouses, and they would strategically place them both inside the government, and also have one inside the government, one say in the White House press corps, one say at a major network.
Yeah.
And they started that whole thing. They diminished revolving door. They reduced the application of a revolving door, or they looked the other way. And then you had a massive increase with the additional funds that went out through NGOs. Now you have, congressional staffs and their spouses getting board seats on these NGOs. I mean, I tell you, this is such a massive problem, and it seems to me, to my eyes, uh, what President Trump calls the swamp, uh, what I call just American industry. It seems like everyone is resisting change because it's going to require everyone to make some sacrifices.
Well, the gravy train ends.
Well, and I'm going to point out something kind of simple, but this same gravy train, these same processes work at local and state levels as well. So we see that same thing. You're talking about spouses and the nepotism and all that that's going on. The same thing happens at every single level of government. So we all need to wake up to it. And there's, federal money is the biggest pot of money, but there is also local and state money that's involved and similar things going on. And, I think well over 20 states, I think almost 30 states have state False Claims Acts as well. And Illinois and New York even have them regarding, people who are defrauding by not paying taxes. So, there's some, don't just look at the federal, there's state level False Claims Act. California, Jennifer.
Oh, for sure.
You have a good one out there. And, you even have one, I think the California one deals with private insurance that's being ripped off as well. So we have the rip off of our federal insurance, but all of our insurance rates are going up because private insurance is also being defrauded in this whole process. There's another 100 billion or so in private insurance fraud, probably just in California alone with the size of.
Not be surprised. Yeah.
So, look, it's a target-rich environment, and we are going to have to figure out a plan to deal with it. And one of the issues that I've been frustrated, like Sallyport, you talk about Sallyport, and I'll send you that complaint later today, John, if you guys want to see it. It's so funny you raised that because I was all over that. 2019, it's Bullock versus Sallyport. It was filed here in Ohio. We thought it was a very clear Federal False Claims Act case, and we're so disappointed that the DOD just shut us down. And they've done that. This is my point. The federal government has shut down I bring them some of the best cases. We are getting, $1 billion cases ought to get attention. And this isn't $1 billion spread over 100 daycares. This is $1 billion with one company.
Yeah.
Or $2 billion with another company. That's, one company. This isn't that complex. You can target it and go get it and subpoena the documents and shut them down.
And so, Warner, when you say we bring these to the government and you're looking for intervention, right?
Well, I don't care. I'd love to have intervention. I'd love to have federal resources, but get out of my way otherwise. Like they're in my way on the Brooke Jackson case. I'm trying to run a case, get discovery, and they're intervening to dismiss the case, saying it's contrary to the public health policy of the United States. Well, what's the public health policy? To permit fraud, to permit clinical trial fraud, to have everyone injected with poison? Is that the public health policy that we have right now? And even if you don't think it's poison, it's certainly ineffective. I think everybody knows that. It didn't stop COVID. It doesn't stop COVID. I personally think it's poison because it causes all kinds of other issues.
And if I may say, it was emergency use authorized with no legal license for any indication.
Of
But
course,
that's just me.
yeah. And again, technically speaking, that's a DOD case as well.
Yes.
That's a military case.
Talk about trying to bang pots and get some intervention.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah.
No, it's DOD that's in charge of that project.
Brad and Warner, what needs to happen? Here's what I am hearing. I'm hearing that we have an eviscerated department that needs restaffing. We need I also hear a train going by. It sounds like
it's a gravy train.
Yeah, right.
Head down to Sallyport.
still
Federal change. We
rolling.
need state change. And we also need, I think, awareness among the nation's attorneys and even law students. We need to get some interest again in fraud fighting. And
I think that's a good point. And I want to tell you that among Freedom Council, we have counselors who are interested in discussing the fraud issues and helping out. So we have a bevy of attorneys who are willing to do that. You know that, Jennifer.
Yeah, we're going to have a Twitter Spaces coming up, are we not?
We are. We're going to have a Twitter Spaces going over the structure of the False Claims Act, how you bring a case, what's necessary to do it. The second thing is there's a great group that I've been a part of for years called Taxpayers Against Fraud, TAF.org. They also go by the Anti-Fraud Coalition. There's approximately 500 attorneys in there that are trained up, ready to go, ready to roll. The third thing is, if the federal government doesn't have the resources, get out of our way. We have the right to proceed on our own. Let us do our job. Let us proceed on our own and represent the brave whistleblowers and citizens who want to do it. And thirdly, we need good researchers and good data for all of these cases. And with the AI capabilities and everything else, it's actually making it easier to develop a good case. And citizen researchers have been poring over the payroll protection program. 600 some cases were filed last year on that alone, that ripoff alone. So, and you can be a data miner and bring these cases. So I'm encouraged, but we also need to refill the DOJ. We need to have young attorneys getting in there. They need to get hired. They need to get trained up, and they need to bring these cases.
Brad, what do you think about that? What can we do about doing that at the DOJ?
No, I think that's exactly what you need to do. I'd take a look at the deferred prosecution agreement superstructure and see if there aren't some changes that need to be made. All the attorneys that get into the Department of Justice, they all want trial work, but very few of these matters, the way the Department of Justice got its trial work in the last 5 years was to take January 6th cases, and that's a far cry from, doing a white collar fraud prosecution. And what I was actually, I saw the big sea change at the Department of Justice that impacted Werner's case against Pfizer, where the government filed a motion to dismiss. To my knowledge, it was the first time it happened. We had, I think it was 8 or 9 cases. I remember Biogen was one of the defendants, AbbVie. There's a bunch of others, but I'm not going to remember. It involved white coat marketing. So what the narrow area of expansion in 2009 that for fraud enforcement that occurred under Obama was kickbacks to doctors by big pharma. And while they were doing things like shutting down 4 offices of the antitrust division and throwing 120 prosecutors out, they beefed up in the fraud section in Main Justice, and they really beefed up kickback cases. So I worked with another attorney to develop this theory about what is known as white coat marketing, where big pharma basically takes their drug rep and they put a lab coat on them, and they send them in to meet with the patient about the pros and cons about going on this or that dangerous drug. So, we thought we really had this one nailed because it just seemed so outrageous. And we had a big meeting with the lead. I won't mention his name, but he's kind of an institution, a really great guy, and a devoted public servant. I think the decision was made over his head. Big conference table, the whole table's taken up, and they told us that they were contemplating filing a mass motion to dismiss on all these cases. And we're like, what? Like, this is impossible. And we had a lot of big shots in on this, so we tried to play that angle too. And the bottom line was they issued like an explanation for why they did it, and they basically lowered themselves to arguing that white coat marketing by drug reps actually makes the system. It actually helps patient efficacy and helps the system be more efficient. That was really when I first saw that something was really wrong on a deep-seated foundational level in the enforcement capabilities. Or I should say, I guess I should say, I saw the harvest of what had begun in 2009. This is probably around 2015, 2016. So flash forward to COVID, where they deep-sixed hydroxychloroquine, they deep-sixed ivermectin. They went so far as to basically concoct these ridiculous studies and sabotage them in different ways with dosages. by not marrying certain drugs and putting them together. Um, and the whole game was to not impact that emergency use authorization, because they had the where remdesivir was being rolled out, and they wanted to get the entire globe under this mRNA platform, because this mRNA platform, it's going to be worth, ultimately it'll be worth trillions probably in revenues to big pharma, which is fine. Big pharma likes to make money, but you should always get stiff resistance, and you should always make sure that their studies are good, that the money isn't being diverted, that it's not being used to improperly compensate decision makers, things like that. And so we have a long way to go. We have massive I believe civilizational enterprise risks. If we don't get this fixed, this is these are enterprise risks that could adversely impact our continued viability as a civilization. And we're at the beginning stages of getting to a point where we can maybe turn the tide.
Let's do it. I mean,
Well,
my gosh.
yeah, I agree with Brad in the sense that I feel like our sovereignty as a nation is being overwhelmed in essence by this corporate structure that's been created. The banks that got away with the mortgage fraud should never, ever, ever have happened. And it shows that they had control of our government. They had control of Eric Holder, who went on to work for them after he left the government. He was the attorney general at the time. And we see the same thing on the pharmaceutical side. The corporations are, we got Bourla meeting with Trump in the White House, pledging $70 billion to get a safe harbor so, they don't get prosecuted here. This is just, so the international corporations now are really trying to override national sovereignty, national criminal enforcement, national civil enforcement. Mm-hmm. And we do that's partly why all this fraud is running rampant too. But we got to pull that back in. As a citizenry, we got to get control of it.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
One thing that I think they could do is they could articulate a new policy in regards to how they collect stats. They need to give criminal prosecutions, like whoever has the most criminal prosecutions in the area, in these core
like
areas.
Pfizer's had criminal prosecutions and pled guilty to crimes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, right.
You mean, Brad, you mean how they changed the goalposts, as you said earlier, from away from actual trials and prosecutions to, wait, look how many haven't been filed.
Yep. There's probably a lot of creative things that could be done with like the joint guidelines that apply to the investigative agencies and DOJ, where they incentivize, again, get back to incentivizing good conduct. Right now, I think there's so much that, and a lot of these changes, again, were implemented in 2009, 2010, 2011. The mortgage fraud, walking away from what were probably hundreds of cases, if not more, that was built, believe it or not, on the LIBOR investigation, which was antitrust division and criminal division, where for the first time in history, the antitrust division, while the antitrust division was getting 4 offices closed down and it was under siege, basically, they strong-armed the antitrust division into accepting deferred prosecution agreements. The antitrust division has a corporate leniency program where only one company gets the deal. If there's a group of companies that are bid rigging or price fixing, only one company gets the immunities, essentially. The rest of the Department of Justice has DPAs, deferred prosecution agreements, where each company can come in, and if you're properly represented and you pay a lot of money, the executive management teams can enter into a compliance integrity agreement, and they kind of get a corporate and individual bath. For the first time in that LIBOR investigation, to sort of, I think, to minimize the prosecution footprint, they forced the antitrust division into taking DPAs. Each one of these things, if you look at every 5-year increment, it's like every seed that is planted 5 years later becomes a forest, a thicket of thorny problems, enforcement problems that are just going to take even more work to undo.
Yeah. Hey, guys, I had a hard stop at 3. If you would, John, just take me off camera. I'll leave it so it's still streaming on Twitter while I've got to go take care of something here at 3:00, if that'd be
Awesome.
okay. I don't want to stop this conversation. And Brad, if you would inform them about the nuts and bolts of getting a case together and getting it presented and how the process works a little bit, I'd really appreciate that. So
Sure.
thanks, you guys. I'm sorry I have to leave a little bit early. I'll be listening as I'm driving to my appointment here. Thank you.
Don't speed.
All right, I won't. See ya.
See you soon, Werner.
Yeah, let's talk about those nuts and bolts, Brad. That would be really good to have a roadmap.
Yeah, so, it used to be that you had to be an original source, which basically meant you had to be inside a company and have, information that was unique. Uh, and it also had to be non-public information, um, which basically means if back then, in the old days, if it was published on some obscure website that no one ever read, that was still deemed to be public, right? And you wouldn't be able to recover. But now a lot of that has been relaxed. In fact, you can even take information that includes public information. If you have unique insight, training, and you're able to put something together, like say, for instance, you mentioned him before, this reporter in Michigan that sort of broke the Somali fraud, Nick.
Oh,
Nick Shirley.
Right.
Nick Shirley, right? Now
Citizen journalist.
yeah, there's enough components of what he did that was non-public, and he showed enough expertise where he could conceivably be a whistleblower. I'm sure he has a lot of information that he hasn't shared. So what you would do is go to your attorney it does this kind of work. You put it together in a False Claims Act case. You frame it in a way where the government will essentially understand it. You identify the false claims that were made or likely to have been made, and you file that under seal in wherever the district court is that you think you have venue. Now, oftentimes the attorneys will go in and will actually brief the AUSAs in advance and say, "Look, this is coming very soon. We haven't filed." And sometimes the AUSAs will actually give you the benefit, not even having filed it, for first. As a general rule, the first in gets the lion's share, if not all, of the benefit. And you get anywhere from 0 to 30%. It's up to 25% if the government intervenes. It's a flat 30% if the government doesn't intervene, and you carry on the suit on behalf of the government. Basically, you're stepping into the shoes of the government that has sustained this injury from having paid out on a false claim.
And that's
And
the relator. You're talking about the
the
whistleblower,
relator,
the person who comes
known as
forward.
known as the key tam relator, or
Yes.
sometimes you say QTR. And it's true that the government has been. This is one area where the government's actually been progressive in working internally to expand its own definitions of who qualifies as a key tam relator. Again, most of these, and I don't care who they are, most of these prosecutors, I would say almost all of them, they want to do the right thing. They're not rubbing their hands together, sabotaging cases. That's not what they're there for.
Right.
It's a control grid system that we're all in, and we're all impacted by it. And the political apparatus of both parties, incidentally, has more control than it probably should in terms of the operations of long-standing rule of law resources that we've always had.
But I think it's really important that Warner has said for these citizen journalists like Nick Shirley or his, the person he came out with, Dave, who
Yeah.
shall be unnamed, who also had been doing all this citizen research. It's really important for those people to connect with the KETAM false claims type of attorney who can then shepherd this claim where it needs to go. I think people need to. We saw immediately after Nick Shirley, we saw all these people in states waking up going, hey, does Washington have this type of daycare fraud? Sure enough, it does. Does California? Well, sure enough, it does. And they
Right.
need to know they can't just be out there on their own. Hook up with some type of false claims attorney and build that case. That would be a really great citizen movement to see.
Yeah, the magic keys to unlock the system where you can actually get some, golden goose eggs out of the system is filing that KETAM suit. And I would recommend they do it as soon as possible because, like I said, it's heavily weighted towards the first to file. But it's not just citizen journalists.
Mhm,
Uh, the I'd say probably 80% plus of KETAM relators are insiders
mhm,
at grantees, at NGOs, or at government contractors who see false claims being made, and uh, it kind of gets complicated. But a lot of times you need to be able to see the actual claim that is made to the government.
mhm.
So if you get into a legal fight, it can often be a really tricky project because, of course, companies know that courts have held that you really have to have access to the claims information.
Mhm.
So they set up a compartmentalization in the companies. So somebody who's likely to see a problem, who's going to come forward, doesn't necessarily see the claims. But
Mhm.
anyone who's in this business is well versed at navigating that challenge. And sometimes you can get some assistance because if the government intervenes, it isn't the court that's determining whether somebody was a QTR. If they get into settlement discussions, the government will make that determination. And like I said, the government is staffed by a lot of people who want to do the right thing.
Mhm.
Somebody said, I think it was a famous comedian whose name I'm blanking out. He recently passed away, but he said uh, that it's really a battle of people wanting to do good against people wanting to do good. And it's not necessarily that people are rubbing their hands together and they're evil. Um, we have a systems problem, and
Mhm.
it's going to take a lot of work to get these systems cured.
And like you said, if it took a long time for these systems to grow and then you got to hack them down, now we have to start over planting the systems and growing them
Exactly,
again. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, we need training programs. I mean, DOJ, somebody really important and smart has to get involved with the National Advocacy Center and also at Glencoe, and at Quantico, which is the FBI training. Glencoe's for the IGs, and really take a fresh look as to what's being taught. Um, and I think we need some real improvement there as well.
And I think the market's out there. I think the people are out there. When you look at even military recruiting that has gone through the roof, when you look at people wanting to sign up, for the FBI or to crack down, and you look at, I think, our young generation of law students coming up. If you market this, if you put it out there, I think you've got the willing audience who wants to do this kind of work. So we're ready to grow it again, I would say, as a country, if we have the time, right? If we have the couple of decades or the administrations that will support this.
We can lay some foundational pillars like in the next couple of years,
Mhm.
and I'm hoping that uh, folks who from the other side of the spectrum that don't feel like they're represented by this, we're all represented by this president. That always bugs me. Like, there hasn't been a president we've had who wasn't my, commander in chief. So this
Mhm.
whole idea, like even some that I didn't like, right, or care for. And that's the other thing too. Like, I was approached in 2009 to assist in offloading uh, essentially ending procurement fraud and grant fraud. And I felt like it wasn't the right thing for me to do. I viewed my role as protecting the taxpayer. That's how it always had been. If uh, the new government coming in, uh, you know, wanted to make that less important, I didn't necessarily want to facilitate that. So I didn't like actively oppose it or seek to be a whistleblower or anything like that. I just went over and I started working in another area for a while. Then I ultimately left the government in 2012. So career civil servants, really, their job is to carry out the lawful orders of the commander in chief, who's the president. Whether or not you agree with it or disagree with it, those are all decisions that are made by the political class. That's how our system works. That's what elections are for.
With lawful being the operative term. Lawful
course.
order. Yeah.
I mean, again, I can't imagine recommending. I think it's beyond reckless. I haven't seen any unlawful orders. I know that there's been a lot of things that have been said about prior administrations. I mean, these are not waters that career civil servants should be wading into. There's a federal principles of federal prosecution. If there's a case to be charged, and a grand jury is willing to indict it, and that's the new policy, that's your job. So let everyone else argue over the politics of it. It's not your role.
And that's Mark Kelly, Senator Mark Kelly now, formerly General Mark Kelly, right?
Yeah, like if he had asked me advice and he didn't, I think that was poorly worded. I think we need things that bring us together, rather than what we're currently seeing. Like if you could take your worst enemy from the other side of the political spectrum, and if you got into a time machine and flash forwarded 100 years and you both got out, you would be lifelong friends in about 5 minutes in terms of all the things you had in common for what had been lost to the past. And we all have more in common as Americans than we have disagreements. And I'm not sure what happened, but I'm sure that the course forward that protects and preserves what we have, as in terms of a viable civilization, coming together is going to be a very important part of that.
That's an excellent endpoint as we approach our 59th minute. Brad, Jennifer, any final thoughts?
No, another good, insightful interview. Thank you, Brad, for being with us. And you have a wealth of experience. I want you on that team to regrow what we need to regrow.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Yeah,
you guys are American heroes.
No matter what side we're on, government, defense, we're all trying to make the system work better in our own way.
Agreed. All right. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you both for coming on, and thank you, Warner, wherever you are driving. I hope you're not speeding. We will see you guys again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe in the Constitution. I believe that one case. I believe in the Constitution. I believe that one case, the right case, can change the world. If you believe this too, Freedom Council is for you. Pursuing a major case can be overwhelming, but we provide a community of practice so that you have the resources available to support your case. My name is Warner Mendenhall, and we are Freedom Council. Join Freedom Council today. freedomcouncil.org.